Hi everybody. Today we're going to do a sand dune, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the sketch that I have in front of me. I did this black and white piece last night, and it's a sketch of the sand dune that we're going to be doing. Let me actually show you. This is the photograph that I took it from right here, and then with this photograph I did the sketch first of all, and now we're going to go ahead and do we just roughed all of this stuff out on the watercolor paper. Now I'm using a totally different paper today. It's pretty thick. I'm not going to say it's 300 pounds, probably about 200 pound stock. It's pretty thick, and it's more of a mechanical paper. You know how I always talk about 100% rag cotton. I thought I'd try this out. It's a paper that I've had around for a while, but very, very, very standard pattern in here. Not sure how it's going to work out, but for those of us that don't always paint on 100% rag, handmade cotton fiber paper, I thought I'd give this a shot, because a lot of you guys that are out there are painting on this kind of stuff. So we'll give it a try and see where it goes. But nonetheless, it's going to be a sand dune, and hopefully we'll have a successful painting. Now the first thing I'm going to do again is go ahead and wet my. I'm going to wet my entire area here, and I'm going to take this. I'm going to take my brush, this brush right here, which is my 2-inch stainless steel sky brush that I use. This is the watercolor brush that I'm usually working with over here. And let's just saturate this, because again, without saturating it, I think we're not going to get the effect that I really want to get here. And I'm not sure of this paper. Like I said, it's a new paper. I have no idea who manufactures this paper. It happened to be in my pile of stock that I've had here for a while, and I've never used it, so I thought maybe it might be interesting to see what happens. And we can see what's happening right now, and that it's just bubbling up here. It's just sort of curling up. So maybe I'm going to end up, let's maybe put some of the stuff on the back, wet it both sides of it. Let me get this out of the way so I don't ruin that. That's really curling. Wow. This is going to be an experiment. So what you can't see what I'm doing because I'm off camera, but I'm just basically wetting the back side of this paper so that hopefully it'll flatten down. All right, because if we wet both sides of the paper, what happens is the paper will lay flat. That way, you have one side, you have opposing sides that are fighting. This wants, if I wet just this side, it wants to curl up toward you. If I wet the other side, it wants to curl back, so it just sort of flattens out. So, again, pretty stiff, about 200 pound paper, thoroughly saturating it. And now that it's wet all over the place, we're going to end up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the sky in, and I'm going to put the sand dunes in, and then we're going to build on the on all of the grassy structure that's over there. And probably the last thing I'll do is put in all, I'm sure the last thing I'm going to do is put all the fencing in. I know that's going to be the case. Okay, so let's just do that. And what we'll do first of all is get the sky in, and we're gonna. The sky on my original photograph, if you remember, is a little bit on the cool side. The entire photograph is a little bit on the cool side. Got water on it. So what I'm going to do is just try to warm it up a bit. Coming in here and mixing, you see there's going to be a lot of water in here. And I'm going to start with my cobalt blue. And just take a little bit of cobalt blue and wet it. And just going to run it across the top of this. And I'm going to add a little bit more cobalt blue. In my sky. I'm going to add, what I'm going to actually do here now is to take, let me just not work with my big brush. I'm going to put this down. And I'm going to get my 1-inch brush. so my 1-inch brush is here. I got it nice and wet. And we're going to come in here and we're going to mix up. I'm going to change up the sky and make it a little bit on the cool side. I'm going to take a little bit of my opera, mix it in with my cobalt blue. A little bit of opera, a little bit of cobalt blue, and taking a little bit of my burnt sienna. And we're going to get this thing, here you go, my opera, cobalt blue, opera, burnt sienna, and it's a little bit on the loose side as you can see. And we're going to start to give this a little bit more of some interest in terms of maybe some of the cloudiness of the sky. I'm going to add a little bit here of my lavender to this and come in here and do something like that. Let's get this down so that it just stays down there. I want to lift. A little bit of lavender coming down here, and we got some water down here. We have a little bit of the ocean over here, so I'm going to change that up and go to and bring in some of my cerulean blue right here. All right, so that's where my ocean is at the back there. And hopefully this will work. I'm going to actually add a little bit of cerulean blue also in my sky. Now we've got all of this stuff going on in the sky area. And now what I want to do is, now that that's in there, and this is all saturated, it's all wet, it's all super wet. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do my sand dunes. Okay, so essentially this is all underpainting. All right, so we have my blue, and the sand dunes are going to be a little bit of yellow ochre, and we're going to do a little bit of yellow ochre with my red. I'm using pyro red. You can use cadmium red. Shadows there. A little bit of mixture of that stuff down here. And let me get a little bit warmer as I come down. Now, my sand dunes actually are going to be coming from upper left to lower right. They're going to be coming down at an angle this way. So I think one of the things that we need to deal with here when we're putting the sand dunes in, and this is all very loose and watery right now, but when we're putting the sand dunes in, we want to make sure that our brush stroke tends to follow the way the sand is coming down, right? So if it's coming down at an angle like this, if it's curving, you know, let me just I'm adding some opera into this thing, make it a little bit bright. I'll show you what I'm talking about. But if my sand dune is curving this way, then we want to do that. If my sand dune is curving this way, we want to do that. So you notice what I'm doing is I'm taking my brush and following the curve of the sand dune. All right, and the curve of the sand dune. So there's a bit of coolness in here. So I'm going to end up working with some cerulean blue and my opera. Cerulean blue, opera. And we're going to cool this down, and right down in this area here, we have a little bit of a cooler effect. And I'm just painting right through, right now I'm painting right through the snow fence that's there. And we're creating some shadows in the sands. Okay, shadowed areas in the sand. This is all shadowed in it. I'm going to come down this way. Shadows areas in the sand. Okay. Cobalt blue. This is all, I'm just sort of mixing this up so it creates some interesting shadows. Coming back here a little bit more with my cobalt blue and my mixture of cobalt blue and my opera together, and this is a little bit cooler back here. I have also back in this area, it looks like a lot of shadowed areas that are going to end up being my foliage that's back here, but it's very cool. Okay, mixing that up with, and now I'm introducing my yellow ochre in here, and coming down with my yellow ochre over here. And this is all just super wet. All I'm doing is I'm just starting to get the feeling of where my ocean is, my sky is, where all of this stuff is going to be. So it's just mixing. It's mixing warms and cools just to get, you see what I'm talking about? Some warms, some cools, to get a general feeling overall of my sand dunes and how I want to handle this stuff. This is all going to be medium valued up in this area here, and light values down in this area here. So the way I'm going to handle that is I'm going to start to take my tissue. You're seeing a roundness here. Hopefully you can see this okay. Yeah, I guess you can. Alright. So take my tissue and dry that out right there. Look at that. All right, so I just dried a dry spot right there. And I'm going to take my tissue and do the same thing over here. Okay. All right, so I got sand, the lightness of the sand. And I'm going to do the same thing over here, because some of this sand is super light. Down in this area here. Lifting the sand, lifting the color out to create the illusion of light areas where it's sandy. Okay, so now you can see that some of this stuff is lighter, some of it's darker. Probably I'm going to do the same thing with the sky. Take my tissue just to create maybe a couple of lighter areas up here where it's, throw a cloud or two in there. I should have done that a little earlier before it dried out, but I think we're okay. You know, we'll just create some just light clouds over here. Okay. Now that I've done that, let's create a little area right here that's a little bit lighter where the water and the ocean meet the sand. So what's going to be really cool about this is that I'm going to end up putting in some darks up in this area that are going to be green to indicate where my foliage is going to be. So I'm going to come in here. I've got a smaller brush here. I'm going to use this one here. I have a slant brush, 1/4-inch slant brush that I'm going to be working with. But to give you some idea of the green, I'm going to actually come in here and take my yellow ochre, mix my yellow ochre with a little bit more pigment, and pick up some cerulean blue. All right, to make sort of a, I guess, an olive green, more or less. Okay, now you've seen me do this before. I'm using this olive green, mixing this all up. And I'm going to start to put in some of this stuff in this area here to indicate where some of the foliage is going to be. Okay, now as I get to certain areas, I'm going to actually use a little bit more of my yellow ochre. And I'm actually got a slant brush, so I'm using the point of the slant brush. So it's a green. The mixture is very simple again. It's yellow ochre and cerulean blue. And it varies. The more yellow ochre, the more it's going to sort of get a feeling of more of a yellowish green with the more yellow ochre in there, and and then we go over here and we're going to do the same thing with some of this area over here. Although we don't want it too much. All right, some of that green is going to be. Okay, and then we're going to end up coming over here and picking up a little bit more yellow. The yellow I'm using is Naples yellow, and I'm going to create some of that little bit Naples yellowish background in this area here, between the fences, between the snow fence. Yellow ochre. Now, again, I'm not trying to do anything other than just put my basic values in here, first of all, right now. That's all. Now, I just went back and took some of my cobalt blue, and I'm mixing my cobalt blue in with my yellow ochre to make a darker pigment. Okay, see this? Cobalt blue, yellow ochre. Okay, I'm getting that olive green, but it's a little bit more intense, darker, if you will. More pigment on this than less water. Plenty of water in this thing. But again, what is the idea here is just to create areas here and there that are going to be a little bit stronger in terms of my values. Okay. Again, cobalt blue, a lot of strong cobalt blue here. And certain where it's more shadowy. Coming back over here, what I want to do now is to pick up a little bit of my brown, my burnt sienna, and I'm making this a little bit, and then I'm going to mix my burnt sienna with my cobalt blue, and make it a little bit browner, warmer. Okay. And the idea behind all of this is that, yes, I want to create shadow. I want to get the feeling of all of this beach grass. I want some interesting values in here, change up of values. Okay, and I'm just bouncing some of this stuff around. All right, so I just mixed up, what I just did is I just took my cobalt blue and I mixed it up with, actually I went in and got some of my new gamboge. Now, this is a different, that's a different kind of green, see? See how different, how lighter this is? A little bit of new gamboge makes it more of a lighter green, cobalt blue. Mixing that up a bit more. And as this dries, you'll see some interesting things that are happening here. So I've got this all nice and wet, and I'm going to let it dry because my dunes are just about, I mean, the dunes are just about done. I mean, if this dries like I want it to dry, then I'm pretty much home free. While I'm waiting for this to dry off, I think what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about general composition, working with colors that are harmonious, moving from light to dark, moving from one color to another color, and moving from warm to cool. So in this entire case right here, you saw me, basically all I did is I applied my wet clear water to the whole paper, and using the wetness of both sides, it saturated the fiber, and I applied the paint to that wetness and allowed the paint to go wherever it wanted to go. I worked up in the sky. The sky is cool. Okay. Now, as I come down to the water's a little bit warmer. If you remember, I did a little bit of cobalt blue with my opera mixture over there, and then mixed it even with a little bit of my burnt sienna, so that I had sort of a real coolness going on in the sky. And that worked out pretty good. Then I went on to my water down here, and the water, you'll notice, is a different color, different pigment. I used cerulean blue for the water. And then I came in here and I actually took the entire area, if you remember, and I put yellow ochre in here, and then I added yellow ochre, and I did it very lightly, very, very watery, and I mixed my pyro red with my yellow ochre and in varying different degrees, and allowed it was all saturated. Then I went in and I picked up the pigment with tissue and dried out these areas. These areas are light areas right here. Here, I'm putting my fingers on my painting, but this is a dry area right here. So what I did is I picked up the pigment that was there, and it brought the paper back to more of a whiter paper. And that's how I really created my lights for the sand dunes, because there's subtle changes in color here that are going on. So I've gone through that process. Then what I did is, after that, I started lining up all of my foliage in the sand dunes that goes on, and in areas. This area here, this area here. This is basically one shape that comes over here. It's a very interesting shape because it comes down and around. This is a sort of a grouping that's right here. A little bit of shape here, a little bit of shape here, with a little bit darker pigment, mixing yellow ochre with my varying colors of either cerulean blue or cobalt blue to create the greens. Okay, a little bit more intense pigments here and there, thicker pigments. By intense I mean not as much water, more pigment than water onto the paper. And I allowed that to just go wherever it wanted to go. And it didn't go too far because there was a lot of pigment. So it pretty much stayed relatively close to where I put it. And as my paper dries, all of this color stuff, what I did is I created a nice variety of varying colors using cobalt blue, cerulean blue, yellow ochre. Variety of warms and cools going on back here. And that's my foliage in the background. Okay? So I see something here that I've got. I mean, some of this is still a little bit on the wet side. maybe I want something that I want to do something like that, lift that off there, and I'm going to just drop something. What I'm doing is I'm looking at it and I'm saying maybe I just could use a little bit of light area right here. Perhaps maybe I can use a little bit of a lighter area in here. After it dried, or after I put it on down and let it set up for a while, what did I do? I took a credit card, and I took the edge of the credit card, wrapped tissue around the credit card, and went in here and lifted the colors, lifted that colors out because they were still wet, and you can do this when it's wet, or it's, let me say, you're not going to lift it out when it's wet so much as when it's damp. When it's damp, it's still liftable. So you can go in here and lift the colors out by just taking a tissue and wrapping it around the credit card. So I created my fencing, and now I'm going to go back and we're going to paint the fence. But we'll paint the fence a little bit more definitively. And that's going to be an interesting thing because we're going to handle that a couple of different ways. But right now what I want this to do, in order for me to paint the fence, I want this to set up because I'm going to take advantage of some of the stuff that I pulled out. In the meantime, probably what I could do, I suppose, it's not in my photograph, but I suppose I could probably throw in a boat or two, or maybe not. Maybe I'm just going to do, let's just build this out and not get too crazy here. This paper, I have some clear water, what I'm doing is I'm just taking clear water right now. I just want to see if I can soften the edges a bit. I guess that wasn't clear, was it? Certainly wasn't clear. All right. Just wanted to soften that, see if I could do that. I can. So the papers, although it's a mechanical paper, it seems like it's probably going to work out pretty good for me. I hope. We'll see what happens. I'm going to take some of these areas now. This little patch, for instance, right here, around the sand dunes, probably could stand a little bit stronger color. Maybe in a few spots. What I'm doing is I'm trying to treat this like a floral. Okay, so we have a hard edge. We'll do a soft edge. We need a hard edge and we need some soft edges. So it'll let it blend together. And all I did is I just came in here and took some some of my cobalt blue. And that's what I'm doing. You see the cobalt blue right there? And it's, I'm going to use a little, keep going, a little bit more pigment in here. Now, I'm in a situation where my paints are probably a little bit too dry. They're not wet enough. And a lot of us get into that situation. I noticed that a lot of people are working off of hard-edged paints rather than soft paints. I probably, before I started this, I should have, I did wet them down, but I should have probably put my cover on top of it. And it might have worked a little bit better. Okay, so my cerulean blue, here's my cerulean blue, and here's my burnt sienna. All right, so I'm gonna play around and mix these two and create some more darks. All right, so the combination of the two. What I'm doing is I'm just beefing some of these areas up a little bit. A little bit more shadow there. Some grass. Probably a little bit too early for a lot of this stuff. And I'm still waiting for some of this stuff to dry. Okay, let's start putting my fence in. So we can do a small round brush. We can work with a small dagger brush, a round brush, or a flat brush. And I'm going to take a small flat brush to start with, because I'm going to be working from left to right. So the first thing I want to do is to find my flat brush that I want to work with here. There we go. You'd think that I would have taken all of these brushes out beforehand. Well, so I'm going to take this brush here, which is an angle brush, and I'm going to start with that. So my fencing is on the gray side. So we're going to mix up some gray. And again, I'm going to mix this on. Basically, again, I'm going back to the same situation. Took my cerulean blue, cobalt blue, mixing up a gray on the sort of cerulean blue, cobalt blue, a little bit of my burnt sienna. Right, mixing up that neutral, and we're going to start to do one at a time. And this is where we have to be patient, and we have to allow the paint to work its magic. And I'm going to try to keep my head out of the way, but the first thing we have is we have one here. We have a fence right here, a fence, snow fence. Alright, so that's fence number one. That's my picket, first picket. First fence number one, right? Okay, next one. Let's do this one right here. It's lighter. And I'm just using my blue to do that with. Okay, so I'm just taking a variety of just varying different so just notice what I'm doing is I'm taking the point of that brush, coming down to the edge, okay, just building my snow fence a little bit at a time. And I'm trying to keep my head out of your picture there. Okay. So we're using my mixture. Some of it is a little bit bluer. I got this tall, I'm going to put this in here, right here. This is going to be a tall one here. Okay. No, don't need a ruler. Just all you're doing is I'm just taking this sort of one step at a time here. I can see what I'm doing is I'm putting. Gotta be careful with this because I'm putting the bottom of this on my paper, and I don't want to do that. So we're gonna have to fix that because I can see it all up here. See if I can get rid of that. I'll have to raise my. See what's happening is that my board is arcing up. You got to get a thicker. In order for this to hold down, you got to get a thicker board. It's just too much. We'll have to do something with that. We'll fix it. We'll fix it all up. So I'm starting to put my snow fence in there, and I'm not even following the pattern of the snow fence. Let's see if. So let's get even darker, or grayer, I should say. I'm using, to gray this down a bit more, I'm going to my lavender. Adding lavender to my mixture. And when you get back here, a lot of this stuff here it's there, the snow fences are there, and it's defined, but you don't need to, in our painting, we don't need to worry about overly defining them. You know what I mean? It's not necessary. Make it lighter. And we'll even make it even lighter and cooler. All right, so we can see that it's going off in a distance. Okay, so now we're going to end up letting this thoroughly dry, because I have to work my magic here. I got to work a lot of stuff in here, and I need this to dry out. So some of it's going to be nice and light, some of it's going to be dark. and I want to create the grass structure and everything else on here. So, and I want to define my snow fence a little bit more. It's going to be important to do. Paper's interesting. I'm just lifting. Lifting out. Lifting out. So it's lighter in the... So my snow fence is actually going to be lighter where it's dark behind it. Okay, certain areas are going to be lighter. Some broken snow fence. Lighter. Certain areas are going to be lighter. It's easier to lift out, quite frankly, sometimes than it is to paint in. Probably more than likely what's going to happen is we're going to do a combination of both. Some of it we're going to lift out. Some of it we're going to paint in. And we're going to create the painting that we want to create. Okay. And once that dries thoroughly, I'll be able to go back in and help this along a little bit more. So while I'm waiting to do that, waiting for this to dry thoroughly, let's go back and make it a little bit more floral, a little bit more fun. We'll grab another brush here, a little bit my little round brush, and start to create some little bit more dark areas. I'm coming in here with my new gamboge. New gamboge yellow ochre. Add a little bit of my red. A little touch of pyro red to it. And add some here and there. little touch of this, little touch of that. What I'm doing is I'm adding a little bit of paint in here, right? And lifting it out a little bit. So we'll create yellow ochre. Adding a little bit of paint. All right. All right. Touch it, let it come out a little bit. Let's go back, get some of that blue with some of that blue with my opera. That nice shadow color. There's some of these nice Again, we're just building this slowly. Alright, so I like what I see almost there, so I'm just going to end up putting some darks in here and there for the snow fence. A little bit darker areas. Let's see if I can just do it. And we're gonna have to do these sort of like carefully. Let's do this. So, just basically now just coming in here and drawing this stuff in. Big wrought iron, gonna make this real dark. Adding some, in order to make it real dark, I have to add some French ultramarine blue down here to bring the darkness. All right. We have a big pole up here too. Okay. Snow fence. Okay. And we gotta do, these have to be here, 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 here. They have to do that. And this has to do this. Okay. Now, let's get my rigger, a little script brush. Try this. I'm going to just dip it around here and here's what I'm doing. Okay, just taking that script brush, and we have stuff coming off. Let's get some real dark. Do the same thing. We're going to just come over here. Okay. Real dark. Do the same thing right here. Notice what I'm doing is I'm just laying that brush down flat along here. Just creating some of those thin lines. Usually sand dunes have got all kinds of crap going on here. There's all kinds of stuff in the sand, as you know. Now I'm just going to create some weeds, some of that grassy stuff that comes up and pops up, that wild grass that grows into the dunes. Just there's a lot of that stuff that grows up on the dunes. Okay, so we're almost done. I want a little thicker brush than this thin one here. Problem is, sometimes these brushes don't, when I put them away, they're not washed out enough. Alright, let's take a little bit of this. What I'm doing is I'm mixing New Gamboge and my cerulean blue, and go back in here, and we're going to start to create some grassy structure. The difference is that this brush is a little thicker. The other one brush was a real fine brush, and we need to come between here. Some of this stuff is going to stand up. I'm going to put some real darks in here too, by the way, because we need them. There's some real darks between. Okay, we'll fix that a little bit more, but let me just come in here and I'm just using a little bit of burnt my orange, my cadmium orange here. Actually, it's cadmium, yeah, my cadmium orange. So I can get some bright, a little bit more brighter areas. I just want to break this up a little bit. And we'll drop in a little bit of my Naples yellow, a little bit here and there. Okay, and then we're going to drop in some nice solid lavender too. Okay. Okay. Gonna beef this up a little bit more out here. Okay. My ocean that's out there. Pretty much about it. I think we got it pretty covered, much covered the way it is. So with that, I think I'm going to just dust this off, let it dry, and if it needs to be changed, then I will change it. So let's just wait and see what happens. Just a quick word to say that I took a look at it overnight, looked at it, looks pretty good. I'm going to leave it as is. So thank you for being with me. Your host, Tony Visco, Painting for Pleasure. Thanks a lot. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.